Yeah, well, thank you, John, for wanting to speak to Shaken Not Stirred about your career. It's very much appreciated.
My pleasure.
I wanted to start off by just covering how you got into the business, first of all.
Well, the magic word in the film business is nepotism. And my father came into the business in 1921, 22. Obviously worked on silent films, worked at most of the studios around London at the time. Worked with people like Hitchcock in, I think, 1929. And so I was born just after the war. And as a young kid, was going on film sets from 3 or 4 years old. So I grew up looking at model boats in tanks and being rowed across a huge outside tank at Denham Studios through Captain Hornblower's fleet, and playing on Sherman tanks on Chobham Common. So naturally, if your dad blows things up and burns things down for a living, what else do you want to do when you leave school? He really wanted me to be a research chemist, which didn't really appeal. And I eventually won the argument and started going off onto film locations with him when I was, 13, 14 years old. So I think the first film I worked on was a film called Exodus, directed by Otto Preminger, filmed in Israel. I had 3 jobs on the movie. One was working with my dad, which was the best bit. The other one was working in accounts, which my dad really appreciated because I was able to find out what everybody on the crew earned. And then I had a small part in the film, directed by Preminger, which firmly convinced me never to stand on that side of the camera again.
Well, Prettinger did have a bit of reputation, didn't he?
Yeah, he. I'd been on the set, watching them filming for weeks, months, and Preminger's reaction to the actors could be quite vociferous. In fact, he sometimes he'd start foaming at the mouth and the spittle would be flying everywhere. And these poor actors, how they put up with it, I don't know. But of course, having watched that and being 14 years old, my knees were knocking so much I could hardly walk. I was only a guard, supposedly in a kibbutz, but it was daunting. But an experience, So, after that, I went away with him when he was doing Lawrence of Arabia. Worked on that a little bit in Spain. Unfortunately, not in Jordan. That's the one location I've always wished I'd been able to go on, living in the desert, because that film I still feel is probably one of the best movies ever made. No one will ever beat it, I don't think, visually. But then I left school when I was 16, flew off to Malaya with my father for 3 months to make a film with Bill Holden, Capuchin, Susanna York, directed by Lewis Gilbert. I think I was so young, I was sort of regarded as the unit mascot by many. But Lewis used to meet me in the morning, sometimes walking up to the set, and his first question was, how are you, boy? How's your love life doing? He was such a sweet man, Lewis. But yeah, happy memories.
How did you find working with Capucine?
She was an interesting character. Very daunting visually. Susanna was of course very young then. But it was, I don't know, back in those days, we all used to get on. We all lived in the same hotel. We all used to mix and talk and whatever. I mean, and when we were on Exodus, we used to sit with Paul Newman's wife more or less every day, having coffee in the hotel. You know, the same applied to all those pictures. And I can remember there was my father and myself, we were the special effects crew. We burnt down a village, blew another one up, crashed a car off a cliff, did numerous bullet hits and explosions, had a bombing run from an aircraft, and I was at 16. I was sent out on my own to do bullet hits that far in front of Bill Holden, which again was, I don't know, looking back on it, I think, how did I have the nous to do it? But it just seemed to fall naturally. So life sort of rolled on from there.
Did Bill Holden, was he quite calm under that?
It was great. I mean, no questions, no problem. I mean, you know, most actors, you get a 16-year-old doing bullet hits in front of them. They would be more than a little nervous, but he just accepted it. And, you know, all the crew accepted me. And, yeah, it sort of gave me a bit of confidence from an early age, which I suppose was good.
Would you say that kind of camaraderie with the cast and crew on productions has changed?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. I mean, the Bonds were hugely different anyway because it was always such a family affair. And, you know, I'd worked with Roger before I worked with him on the Bonds, Roger Moore, and he was lovely. I mean, Roger could get on with anybody. But again, you know, we used to go out for dinner wherever we may be in the world, and it was usually some pretty fun places. And, you know, Cubby pulled everybody together. It was such a sort of family atmosphere. And, you know, I can remember numerous locations where, you know, half a dozen of us would go out for dinner with Cubby and probably Barbara. And Cubby's tales and stories were always a joy to listen to. And, you know, whenever I was in LA, I used to get invited up to the house, either to go out with Barbara for dinner or watch a film in the theatre he had in the garden there. And we were just sort of accepted as friends, and you don't get that anymore. You know, the artists now are all locked in their trailer homes. But, you know, back 20, 30 years ago, Pinewood, for instance, where we'd shot most of the Bond movies, you'd break for lunch, you'd go into the restaurant, if you managed to book a table in the restaurant, and you'd be standing in the queue for the buffet, and there'd be Roger in front of you, Barbara Streisand behind you, and they queued for their lunch as well. Well, you won't get that now. Not with the some of the actors that are out there. So it's different times, and I think the whole world has changed dramatically.
Oh, so you think of what actors get paid these days compared to what what Roger would have got compared to what the new Bond will get.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I mean that goes across the board. I think with many things. I mean, all our salaries have gone up in the last 40 years or so. When I think what I was paid to do A Bridge Too Far compared to the last Harry Potter, you couldn't believe it. But, the same applied to every trade.
I wonder whether there's now sort of an elitism with actors because their jump seems to be so much higher. Maybe there's part of that, maybe why you get that kind of difference.
Well, I think a lot of it was probably the end of the studio system, where most of the major studios had the actors under contract, and that kept their salaries down. And it wasn't until some of the actors started to break away from that they the system sort of fell apart and the studio system changed. And I think that was probably the beginning of the change. And of course, since then, actors now participate as producers and some of them directors. So, yeah, it's a different world.
So you worked with your dad, of course, a number of times, but your dad had worked with Cubby Broccoli, I think on about 8 or 9 films. So as you alluded to, you've got some good memories of working with Cubby. And do you have a favourite memory, or maybe even a story that he told you that perhaps lingers?
One of my favourite memories is when I was growing up, Dad was doing all the Warwick films with Cubby and Irving Allen. And I was quite young at the time. And I had 2 pet mice. I had a black one and a white one. And the white one I called Irving, and the black one I called Cubby. Goodness knows why, looking back, but I did. And one day I made the big mistake of telling Barbara that. And Barbara rushed straight into Cubby's office and informed him that he was the black one, which did cause a certain amount of laughter at the time. But, those were the sort of things that used to happen back then.
Oh, that's a lovely story. And it was your dad that got you working on Bond originally, albeit the spoof Casino Royale.
Yeah, I'd been working with him for, 3 or 4 years then. I mean, we'd done quite a number of films up to that point, and then we did Casino Royale, the first one in the 60s with, was it 4 or 5 James Bonds? And David Niven, Woody Allen, Peter Sellers, Terence Cooper, and that was a really bizarre experience. And again, I was early 20s, running the set. We built the interior of the casino and filmed it on, I think it was A Stage at Shepperton. And then they shot on it for 3 weeks. And this was when it was with Sellers and Orson Welles. And they wouldn't work together at all on the same day. So we used to shoot that way on the table one day and that way the next. And anyway, we got through that, and then they pack-strapped the set, and then they rebuilt it on D stage, I think it was. Never shot on it. They pack-struck it again. Then they rebuilt it on the silent stage, where we filmed for 3 months. The funny part of the story was that the third time they built the set on the silent stage, they had a huge brown carpet that laid over the whole set. And when they rolled it out into the set the third time, in the very middle of it, somebody's living room had been cut out of the carpet. I don't think they ever did find the culprit, but it's one of those funny stories of back in the day. Then we shot on it for 3 months on the silent stage with a director called Richard Talmadge, who was an old Hollywood stuntman. I think he'd done things like Hell's Angels, and he'd been around a long time. And he asked me one day, they wanted to have the stuntmen free fire flaming arrows from the balcony and the casino onto the crowd. And I refused because I said it was too dangerous. None of the stunt people's or the extras' costumes have been fireproofed. And, you know, even if you put a rubber tip on the arrow, it just wasn't safe. And I was called off the set into the production office to talk to Charlie Feldman, the producer, on the phone. And Charlie said, bear in mind I was 21 then. I'm told that you refused to do what the director's asking you to on the set. And I said, well, yes, sir. One simple reason, it's not safe to do it. I'm not prepared to set people alight or take their eye out for a movie. And he said, oh, that's all I wanted to hear. Put the production manager on the phone. And we never did it. So, you know, there were times you had to stand up and be counted.
He sounds quite a sensible person, Charlie Feldman.
Well, obviously, you know, nobody wants to hurt, kill or maim anybody or anything for a movie. So, you know, safety has always been my priority. Bear in mind you're talking to the person who hung out for a helicopter over a waterfall trying to shift a boat. So, you know, you had to stretch it sometimes.
Oh, yeah, we'll definitely come to that. Obviously, Casino Royale was very famous for going through, I think it was 5 directors they had, just chaotic, you say, set being built on stage and then not being used. Was the producer Charlie around to do, or I suppose
Charlie was always on the phone.
Yeah.
Johnny Dark, who was lovely and a great friend in latter years, and John was the production manager on the first Lewis Gilbert film I did in Malaya, and he was line producer on the film. But we had 7 directors. The Scottish first director, whose name escapes me at the moment, but will come in a minute. He was a great friend of Peter Sellers, which I think is why he got the job in the first place. But they fell out. I mean, Peter could fall out with most people, bless him. they fell out almost to the point of fisticuffs. So rumour had it at the time. Joe McGrath was his name, lovely man, and in my opinion, ended up his work in the film was some of the best in it, I thought. Then we had Bob Parrish, who came in directing. He was another lovely man. I did another 2 films with him in after that. Then we had Tony Squires, John Huston, Ken Hughes, Val Guest, Dick Talmadge, and we were filming in Shepperton, MGM, Pinewood, and on locations. So, you know, I used to wake up in the mornings and it was a devil's own job to remember which studio to go to. So I ended up working with all of the directors at one time or another. And I remember one scene we did with Bob Parrish, which was Orson Welles in the supposed control room, and he had to get electrocuted and blown up, and the control room had to spark and flash, and I'd rigged it all up. And Orson came on the set, and I said, look, so you sit here, do this, do that. Whatever you do, when you fall forward on the desk, don't put your hand there and don't put that hand there. So we did the shot, and Orson, of course, put his hand right there and right there, and he just scorched the fingers on one hand, and stood up and called me a lot of names. But the shot, of course, was no good because the dead body had jumped up. So I was asked to re-rig it, which I did. And much to my amazement, Orson came back on the set to do take 2. And before we did it, he called the whole set to quiet. And he said, I owe this young man an apology. It wasn't his fault, it was mine. I'm sorry. And I thought, to get that from Orson Welles, it put him way up in my estimation. You don't get many actors do that.
So he played Le Chiffre in the film. In the first version of it, of Casino Royale, the 1954 TV version, it was Peter Lorre who played Le Chiffre, and I do believe you encountered Peter Lorre on a production.
Yeah, Peter Lorre was on Scent of Mystery, which again my father did. I was quite young then. That was, I think, about 57, 58, shooting in Malaga, Torremolinos. At the time, there was one hotel in Torremolinos, so I'll show you how long ago it was. But yeah, he was. I met him on the set. My father introduced me, but Dad was very good like that. He'd always sort of introduce me to the actors. I can remember when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, a golden-haired god called Richard Burton sat me on his horse on Alexander the Great. So it's little moments like that in life you never really forget.
And you got a photo signed by Peter Lorre, I understand.
Yeah. Peter signed a photo. Back in the early days, my father used to get a lot of things signed. I went for many years where I didn't bother to ask for signatures. I was too embarrassed because I was working with them. And then in latter years, I found I could give an autograph book to the second or third AD and say, oh, when you go up to the dressing rooms, can you get them to sign that for me? So I've got some lovely comments from people like Maggie Smith and, a long list of different actors and people over the years. And a lovely, lovely comment from Cubby as well.
Have you got a favourite autograph in your collection?
Cubby's one probably means most, because it's very personal. And that was the man. He was the best producer I ever worked with, bar none.
You did work with director Richard Lester on a couple of occasions. We should probably mention the film Help. Do you recall the Fab Four?
Oh, yeah, I mean, looking back on it, I mean, the Beatles were at their height. But, you know, we used to go to work every day at Twickenham and we'd be on the set. There'd always be musical instruments around. And suddenly, you know, the boys used to stay on the set in between shots or takes. And while we'd be preparing whatever it was, one of them would pick up whatever the musical instrument was and start playing it. And then Ringo would pick something up, and then Dick Lester would go and sit at the piano, and all of a sudden there'd be a jam session going on. Well, you know, we were working in the middle of all this, and I don't think we really appreciated it for what it was, because, you know, looking back on it, to have shared that experience was something else. You know, how many people have sat with the Beatles playing a private session? Yeah.
And you were at Stonehenge, and you had tanks and
yeah,
stuff like
Stonehenge. Yeah. Those were the days they allowed us tanks and explosions on Stonehenge. I mean, you can't get anywhere near it now, but yeah, we did all sorts of things with them, and it was fun. I mean, the actors were great. Victor Spinetti, John Bluthal, you know, they were all great characters. And, yeah, just good memories. And then I did, after that, funny thing happens on the way to the Forum, with Dick Lester again. We were filming out in Madrid for 3 months. And, you know, little snippets I can remember. I think it was probably the end of Picture Party, and I was standing on the sidelines, probably with a large drink of something, and Zero Mostel came over to me and said, why aren't you dancing? I said, oh, I'm not a very good dancer. He made me stand on his feet and he waltzed me round the entire dance floor. Like that. Well, how many people have danced with Zero Mostel? You know, it's fun things over the time. Just little moments, but they're things you never forget.
Am I correct? Was it Buster Keaton's last film?
Buster Keaton's last film.
Yeah.
So yeah, we worked with him in the middle of Casa de Campo in Madrid. I think that's what it was called. Yeah, and there was a very well-known area just outside Madrid called Manizales, where I think every film that's been made in Madrid has filmed at one time or another. And we'd be out there with chariots chasing along, a camera car and the chariots, and we'd come round a corner, and in front of us would be 3 tanks shooting Battle of the Bulge. So we turn around and go back the other way. We go around another corner, and there'd be cowboys and Indians coming towards us. And, you know, it was just bizarre times. And so, yeah.
It's very impressive the chariot work in that film. And I spoke to the co-star Annette Andre about it, and she was on a couple of occasions she was quite fearful for her life. So it was always kind of safe, but on the verge of kind of.
Well, again, we had to make a battery-driven chariot that would trundle along without horses, and my father was on the set all the time. He was back in the workshop, and they built this chariot with lead-acid lorry batteries in the floor and an electric motor to drive it. But I think the mistake on it was a single wheel in the front to steer it. So, of course, I volunteered to test it down a hill on the location, and it went down the hill quite well and probably a bit faster than expected, but suddenly the front wheel flipped round and it tipped over and it landed upside down on top of me, which actually, fortunately, didn't break anything, but unfortunately all the lead acid came out the batteries and soaked my trousers. So I had to run down the hill and jump into a stream to wash it all off, which was fine. I mean, I wasn't burnt or anything. The funny thing was I sent the trousers to the laundry the next day, and the maid brought them back to the room that night, and all there was a waistband with a lot of shreds hanging from it because the battery acid had burned it all away.
And you always made a point of testing the rigs yourself on films.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing
really.
much to the annoyance of a lot of stuntmen. I've never liked to ask anybody, actor, stuntman or otherwise, to do anything if I hadn't tried it first, because with the best will in the world, it doesn't matter what you build. Some of these rigs, when you operate them, there are little nuances and things that you find out. Do this or don't do that. And I don't care if it's a flying motorbike on Harry Potter or an aircraft rig on a Bond. I've always felt if I tried it, I did draw the line on certain things, but I knew it was safe, and I never felt guilty about asking anybody else to risk anything that I'd done or rigged. It led to some interesting moments. I did a film called Lucky Lady, directed by Stanley Donen, who I did 3 or 4 films with. And it was starring Gene Hackman, Burt Reynolds, Liza Minnelli. And I had to blow up 5 boats for the battle scene. And they were 5 big boats. And there was one in particular which called for a seaplane flown by the great Frank Tellman to come in behind the boat and fire its machine guns. Got bullet hits in the sea, across the sea leading up to the boat, and then the boat blows up. So the only way to do it was to seal off the cockpit, which was in the front. We put a steel plate on the back of it with a little viewing hole. I had a stuntman with me to drive the boat, and then the back end of the boat we blew apart with big fuel fireballs and goodness knows what. And it all worked perfectly. The plane came in, the strafing. I had a row of explosions in the water that were trailing behind the boat. so I could fire those in time with the machine gun, blew the back of the boat up, which all worked really well. The only problem was that when the explosion went off, it stopped the engine. So the boat stopped, but it swung round in the wind. So the flames in the boat were all blowing back into the cockpit. So the stuntman and I had to jump overboard, which was fine. I mean, safe seawater, apart from the fact we'd seen a great white shark in there the day before. Yeah.
There's a nice picture in your book from the film with Gene Hackman's in a little boat sinking.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that?
Well, we had bullet hits in the boat and leading up to the boat, and I'd rigged some concrete anchors on the seabed in this little cove where we were going to shoot it, so that we could control the boat and pull it down with wires. Gene and Bert were going to be in the boat, and we were going to do the bullet hits across the water with a marble gun, which was fine because as long as you're firing from the right angle, there's no danger of a ricochet hitting anybody. So you don't do it straight at them, you come obliquely, and the marbles, if they ricochet off the water, they're going away from them, not towards them. Unfortunately, Bert and Gene were on the camera boat, and I was on the effects boat, positioned to fire obliquely. And what I was waiting for was for them to come out, get in the boat, and I could tell them exactly what was going to happen. But I'm summoned over to the camera boat by Burt Reynolds. So I go over there, and I'd already had a bit of a run-in with Bert's stuntman, Hal Needham, who was a bit of an interfering gentleman. And Bert starts having a go at me that it wasn't safe, and firing bloody marbles at me, and I'm trying to calm him down and explain to him what is going on. And he had a bottle of Fanta orange in his hand and suddenly threw the orange all over me. And I mean, I was quite young and fit in those days. And I thought, do I put one on him? Or what? If I hit the leading man and black his eye, it's not going to go down very well with 20th Century Fox. So I looked him up and down, sneered, and walked away. And anyway, we did the shot. And I got back to the dock where everybody came in at night first, deliberately, and waited on the dock for Reynolds to get off the boat. And I walked over to him and I said, look, if you ever throw any orange or anything else over me again, I said, I will thump you. And so, of course, then it develops into a bit of a to and fro. And I said something to the effect of, oh, you want me to hit a Hollywood leading man and then have every lawyer in Hollywood on my back. And he lost his temper, and he said, Jesus Christ, you English something or other. Even when I throw a bottle of orange over you, stand there like some English gentleman and make me feel that big. And I thought, oh, hello, I've won. And anyway, we actually patched things up after that, and by the end of the film, he was on my side. But it was just one of those sort of trying times that you don't really need in life.
So that was probably the worst kind of experience you probably had on a film. I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few, but too few to mention.
Do you think sometimes because it's such a high pressure environment, filmmaking, that sometimes people can perhaps in a way that perhaps they wouldn't normally on, where there's, it's not so tightly wound, or?
I have to bite my tongue a little bit here. I've never been afraid of going up to somebody and saying, you don't behave like that. There was a silly occasion on Cliffhanger where Sly Stallone had a go at one of my boys completely unprovoked. And I felt I can't let it go, so I went out to his caravan and said, look, you don't do that. But, if you're polite and honest with people, you don't have to be antagonistic. Just be honest and quiet and nice, and most of the time that works.
Sometimes people don't get probably, but picked up on bad behaviour. So if people do that, then obviously it can. Maybe sometimes they don't know what they're doing. Sometimes,
yeah, it happens. But the other thing I learned very early in life is, if it's your fault, admit it, and the quicker you admit it, the quicker you defuse it. If an effect doesn't work, not that that's ever happened, of course, but you stand up and say, sorry, Gov, my fault, let me, correct it. And I think people think far more of you if you do that, rather than try and cover up or use what is become, unfortunately, far more common these days, is the blame game. Everything happens and somebody wants to point a finger at blame at somebody, and it's just so unnecessary.
So just before we come to your re-entering the world of Bond, I wanted to mention Escape to Athena, because of course you have Roger Moore, which I think would have been the first time you probably encountered Roger, and also Claudine Cardinal, of course, died very recently. Cardinale, yes.
I've worked with Roger before on Gold.
Oh yes, Peter Hunt directed that one, yeah. I was asked to work on Escape to Athena. It was, funny enough, I'd been asked to do the first Alien film, and I met Walter Hill, who was going to direct it at the time, up in 20th Century's offices in Border Street. And we talked about the chest burster and all the different things. And I can remember telling them how I'd do it if I did the movie. And of course, then it went into turnaround because Walter Hill wasn't going to direct it. David Giler stayed on. And the other producer, whose name escapes me. Anyway, it went into turnaround, and it was dragging on and dragging on. And I was offered Escape to Athena for quite a lot more money. And I rang up Peter Beale, who was at Fox at the time, and said, look, I've been hanging on for Alien, but I've been offered this.
and he offered to put me under a 2-year contract for Fox. But I thought, I don't really want to do that because I might end up doing something really boring. And Escape to Athena looked like a fun movie. I didn't know George Cosmatos at the time, who was a very excitable Greek gentleman, who I actually became great friends with. But I remember at the start of it, we were having a meeting in the producer's office, and they asked me how I'd do something, and I told them. And anyway, we all went back to our offices, and about 10 minutes later, there's George could put his head around my office door, and he's going, psst, psst, psst. And I followed him up the corridor. He goes into his office and he says, "Don't you ever talk to the producers again and tell them how you do something without telling me first." And I've never had anybody do that. And I said, "Look, George, the producers are paying me, but you've got to trust me that my first allegiance on the film is to the director. And I'll do whatever you want, but there's no point in me staying on the film if you don't trust me to do that. So let's clear the air here and now. I'm on your side. I'm doing the best I can for you. Trust me to do it, or I'll walk." And after that, we were great pals, and he was very neurotic. Certainly didn't get on with some of the people on the film. But of course, it was working with Telly Savalas, Claudia Cardinale, Roger Moore, David Niven. And again, it was one of those movies, Richard Roundtree, Elliot Gould. We were all staying in the same hotel. A lot of us had young kids at the time. And we'd play with the kids, and days off we'd end up in the airfield with Elliot Gould and Telly Savalas playing baseball with the kids, and taking them up for helicopter rides. But Claudia Cardinale, bless her, was so beautiful. And, I can remember talking to her one day. We were doing something in the Greek village, and she was so charming and lovely. Great loss this last week. But it was a great cast. Roger, as always, was fun. Telly spent most of his evenings in the local casino. It was a good crew, and we did lots of model stuff. Again, pretty much, off the cuff out in Greece, foreground miniatures and, tricks. It was another, enjoyable movie while it lasted. And I used to meet George regularly after that, and he was always a lot of fun. And he was also a great friend of Stan Winston, who I knew very well from Aliens. So, a little group of us in LA who always had a bit of fun together.
And David Niven, of course, on the film, and worked on Casino Royale with you. So what was David Niven like?
He was lovely. He was a real gentleman. Told lots of funny stories. He was a real Hollywood character that, grew up during those golden years. And, of course, he knew Errol Flynn very well. And some years later, we were in Jamaica doing a Treasure Island film with Chuck Heston. And in our hotel bar every night used to come Patrice Wymore, I think her surname was, who was Errol's fifth wife. So she used to tell some interesting stories as well.
Another Bond connection, on the Battle of Britain, Robert Shaw. Don't you remember what Robert was like?
Yeah. He was all right. I didn't have a lot to do with him. He was up in the cockpit of Spitfires, all of our explosive work and bombing and blowing things up, and London Blitz was done with a minimum of actors. I think it was. I think the biggest scene we had with actors of any note in it was with Kenny Moore and Susanna York up at Duxford when we blew the hangar up. But again, such a privilege to be on that film. It was the fifth largest air force in the world. Hamish McCaddy had put together, and there we were all day with Spitfires and Lancaster, Hurricanes and various planes taking off. We had a Hurricane out on the tarmac one day at North Weald, and we were all preparing explosions and things. They brought the Hurricane out of the hangar to warm it up, and the mechanic was obviously in it revving the engine, and the propeller came off and cartwheeled across the airfield. Fortunately, not in where there were any crowds of people, but it was interesting thing to watch.
Oh, I could imagine, yes. Just to touch on Escape to Fina briefly once more, did you encounter Sonny Bono on that?
Sonny Bono, he was on it. He was a character. He did split up from Cher at that time. And in fact, I think our second unit director went back to the States with his, I can't remember, but anyway, gloss over that one.
Oh, yeah, of course. So you come back to Bond for Moonraker. Mm-hmm. How was it you ended up back on the Bonds?
I think Derek had started the film, and Derek was very engrossed in the model work, and not paying much attention to the live action stuff, which of course was in his remit. And I think there'd been a few problems along the way. And I knew Lewis. Lewis obviously knew me, the director. Bill Cartledge, I'd worked with on many pictures. He was a line producer on it. And they asked me if I'd take over the practical effects. And because I knew the guys that they'd already got out in France, and I didn't really want to step on their toes because I knew it would cause a bit of unpleasantness. I'd agreed that I would go on the film, but I would only look after separately everything in America and South America. So the first thing I did was went off to Iguazu with Ernie Day, the second unit director, and we wrecked that. I had a crew start at Pinewood, where we were putting together all the speedboats and the torpedoes and bombs and stuff, and just generally sort of planned everything out for the 2 locations, and of course had Lewis's blessing. So, we went and looked at the Iguazu Falls, and I rang Cubby and Bill up the next day and said, look, I know you've already committed a lot of money to this, and some of the boats are already on their way out to Brazil. But in all honesty, I think the chances of our getting a boat to go over the falls, as has been promised, is a very slim chance indeed. But if you want us to have a go, we'll do it. So, of course, what it involved was putting 1.5 tons of Bond boat without an engine in the water, probably somewhere between 1/4 mile and 1/2 mile upriver, bearing in mind it's a huge river and a very big waterfall and a bloody long drop down. And the only way to do it was to manhandle it and control it with ropes. So they got in a team of squaddies from the local military, and the first day there we get in the water, bearing in mind we're quite a long way up from the falls, but the water's flowing fast, and 1 minute it's up to there, the next minute it's up to there. It's dark brown, so you can't see what's in it. And we started going from rock to rock, and we'd pull the boat across. One of my guys would go out to that rock, and I'd stay on that one, and then we'd leapfrog one another, working our way down. And it took us a good couple of days or more to get it down into a position. But after the first day, I saw the faces of these army guys, and they were bloody terrified. And my feeling was, look, we're being paid to do this. They're not. They're being told to do it. It's not right. It's not fair. I'm not using them anymore. And had a bit of a row with the production manager out there. So I rang Cubby and Bill in France and said, look, I'm not prepared to use these people. We'll do it on our own. And Cubby took the point and said, you're absolutely right. And we manhandled the boat down until we were about 100, 150 feet above the edge of the falls. And we'd start this in the morning, probably about 10 o'clock. And Johnny Morris and I wouldn't be able to get out of the water probably until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we had no drink, no water, no food, because once you're out there, there's no way of getting it to you, and it's a crawl back through the jungle and spiders' webs that big to get back. So we opted to stay in the water all day and just get it done. And we got it into position, got a release hook on it, and put all 5 cameras out, or however many there were, turn over, release the boat, we pulled the pin, boat goes forward beautifully all the way up to the edge, and then impaled itself on a rock, which is pretty much exactly what I said would happen. So then there's the fun bit with me dangling under a helicopter, trying to push it over. Again, it's not something you can ask somebody else to do. You've got to be mad to do it yourself in the first place, I think. But the problem was they couldn't do any of the plate shooting or any more filming there because the boat was stuck in the middle of shot. So it had to go. So anyway, we did the helicopter thing and the stitching on the harness, starting to break.
Which you could barely hear over the water.
Well, that was the funny thing was, you've got the rush of the water, you've got a helicopter 20 feet above your head, and the loud sound of this ping, 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 because it was right in my ear, I suppose I could hear it. But I thought, what on earth is it? And it took me a few seconds to realise that it was the stitching on the harness going. So of course then it's a very quick decision. Is it better to stay with the boat and let the harness break, or leave the boat and hope the harness holds to get back up? So I opted for that, and then of course, because I was hanging on a rope and a wire, I had a rope from the cargo lifting point, because that's the only place the helicopter could pull from. But to get me down there, they had to lower me on the winch. So of course, as soon as I let go, I spun round and the two wire and the rope got all tangled up. So it was taking forever to get me back up. And I can remember I just got up and got my hands on the skid, so I was hanging underneath, obviously still attached. And Johnny Morris, who was my main guy, was in the helicopter, and he signalled thumbs up to the pilot that I'd actually got as far as the helicopter. The pilot unfortunately thought he meant I was in the back of the helicopter, so he did one of those over the edge of the falls and up the river, or right down to the bottom and then up the river, but I'm still hanging underneath on the skid. So that was a bit reminiscent of Superman. That was the story. I've told it too many times.
What was the state of the harness when you? How bad was it?
It was all right. It would have held on a bit longer, I think.
Because you had also tested the rig, I think, for Superman, as you alluded to. You'd gone up and...
Well, I did all the first flying of Superman on the first film out in New York. So we flew Chris Reeves over, it was 57th Street in New York, about 100 feet up in the air, and out in the Heights opposite New York, where he gets the cat out of the tree.
Is that Washington Heights, or is it?
Yeah, I think it probably is. And I did all the stuff up in Canada with Superman running beside the train. Again, I found somewhere, or somebody sent me a little while ago, some video footage of me running across Shepperton Back Lot in slow motion, because Dick Donner asked me to figure it out and gave me a unit to go on the back lot and start doing tests. So first thing we did was I ran across the lot with a tracking camera and slowed it down to different speeds to see, what it looked like, and whether we could use it, and then we ended up hanging young Superman on wires from a crane arm. But yeah, all fun stuff.
I was wondering how Christopher Reeve was able to sort of use his experience as a pilot to reflect that, and how he did the flying. That probably added made it a lot easier, I would have thought, from everyone's perspective.
I mean, that fluidity again. That goes all the way through from there to Harry Potter when we did the broomstick flying. Is trying to get that fluidity of somebody actually flying, making them look like they're riding a bike, rather than being perched on a broom.
And Moonraker, of course, was nominated for an Oscar for its effects. Paul Wilson, John Evans, and Derek Meddings. Do you recall John Evans or Paul Wilson? Did you?
Yeah, Paul was my cameraman on most of the model shoots on the Bonds. And I'd known Paul since 1964. Actually, before that, he and Alex Thompson were on Scent of Mystery. So I'd met them way back then. And I worked on, and Paul did a lot of Dick Lester's films. So he and I were, good friends.
You worked on Trail of the Pink Panther and also Curse the Pink Panther that were shot together. Was it a strange feeling on that film, especially having worked with Peter Sellers on Casino Royale? What was it like to be on that production?
He used to love ideas, which I always used to enjoy making. Yeah, so I left Pink Panthers to do Octopussy, and left George Gibbs and Richard Conway on it to finish it off. Which I didn't mind doing, and Octopussy was a much more interesting challenge.
Oh yes, I can imagine. And you went to India for that one. What were the highlights of being in India?
Wasn't my favourite place in the world. I think 12 of us went out on the recce, and I think 2 of us didn't become sick.
Anthony Way was talking to me, because he would have been one of the few that went out with the recce, and he said that they tested the water everywhere, and the hotel where you were all staying, I think the one that's in the film, had the highest concentration of feces and all the other things you could possibly imagine. So the fact everybody didn't get ill, I think, was quite a surprise.
3 samples from the Lake Palace Hotel. One was from the bottled water, one was from the jugs in the room, and one was from the lake outside, which is where all the feces from the local town went, and the women did all their washing in the side of it. And of the 3 samples, the lake water was actually the cleanest.
So you're quite happy to leave India, it sounds like.
I spent, 2 weeks there. I used to clean my teeth in vodka, drink vodka, and only ate the vegetarian curries, and I was fine. But those that ate the meat and the fish were not too good when we got away.
So you've got some good travel tips if you ever decide to go to India. So you did the taxi sequence, I imagine.
Yeah.
What was that quite complex in terms of, did you fit them out back in the UK?
Yeah, we bought I think 4 or 5 taxis and had them shipped back to UK. We put, I got Dave Bickers actually to put bigger engines in for us, and then we rigged them up, and then I think Dave actually did most of the stunt work on the jumping and things. But yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting picture from my point of view because of the model work. And I still think the opening sequence on Octopussy is one of my favourites. And again, you know, it was trying to be inventive with the BD jet, and you know, we were stuck with filming on the back lot, which isn't the Pinewood back lot at the time, wasn't the biggest place to take off and land a big model aircraft. We put, because there weren't model jet engines back then, we put a very high revving motor on the front with a slightly lower pitch propeller, so that the propeller was going incredibly fast, so it wouldn't photograph as much. We'd managed to take off all right every time, but landing, 2 or 3 of us were running around with big nets stretched across the back lot to catch the plane and stop it before it crashed into black park trees. But, you know, there were some of the tricks that we had to come up with, you know, bearing in mind this is all pre-CGI, and I think that's why it all looks real. We had the BD jet being chased by a missile, and you know, we looked at little missiles going through water tanks and all the old gags. So we actually built a scale lightweight balsa missile. We cut down magnesium flares to put in the back. That gave us I think it was a 15-second burn. We put a spool from a sewing machine, the very small ones, inside the plane with a nylon thread going from the nose of the missile, fed into the back of the plane and round the spool. And then we put a couple of hidden wires on the top of the aircraft that the rocket would sit on. So the idea was the plane would take off. When we got it up and everybody was ready, he'd turn upside down briefly, drop the missile off. The nylon would pull off the spool in the back until it was the right distance behind the plane, 15, 20 feet. So then you've got a plane flying with a missile following it wherever it goes. So then we'd get it into what we thought was the right position to bring it in to fly past camera and do manoeuvres. Trigger the magnesium flare with a cut down radio control receiver that was built into the missile. The flare would light up, and then we'd have 15 seconds to film the manoeuvres. And pretty much all of what we shot is in the movie. And, you know, it looks real because whatever the plane did, the missile followed it. So it was obviously chasing.
Oh, it's a very effective sequence, I
and
think.
you know, that and the horse's bum coming up out of the back of the horse box. We built a BD jet with an engine in it that Roger could drive. It called for the BD jet to fly through the hangar. Corky Fornoff said he could do it for real in a BD jet, but then informed everybody that, you know, he's doing 300 miles an hour, so you can't have anybody in the hangar. The doors at both ends have got to be wide open. And I think I worked it out. The length of the hangar, the BD jet would be in and out of it in something like 3/4 of a second. So not very filmic. So I came up with the idea of mounting a full-size jet on a pole arm on the that was welded into the back of a Jaguar saloon car. So we cut the roof off, painted the saloon in camouflage colours, put a pole arm on it with an air hydraulic ram to a gimbal on the top, so that we could make the plane bank as it went through. And the idea was that I'd drive it into the open doors of the hangar. As it got near camera, we banked the plane over so the wing hid the pole arm, and we dressed the foreground with various to hide the car as it went through. Johnny Morris again sat in the back of the car, controlling the hydraulics, and I drove it through at, I think it was about 75 miles an hour, and we had stuntmen at the far end closing the doors up to 2 stops, which left me, I think it was about 6 inches aside to get through the doors at the other end, which was a bit tight, but it worked. And again, it all came on camera and it looks real. So
yes, it's a wonderful opening sequence, and of course you the climax is the explosion of the hangar as well,
Yeah.
and the wonderful notion of having all the tiles glued separately, so when it blows up, like it would on a real building.
Well, I had all the corrugated sheets made individually. I think up till then they used to build models with one sheet and paint it on, and I wanted to see all the bits. Something I learnt from my dad: put bits up in the air when you do explosions. Looks much more real.
Oh yeah, very effective. Yeah.
And we filmed that from a basket hanging under a crane, and we got the crane driver to swing the crane arm so we were flying away from the hangar. Shot it at 120 frames, and
So just to finish off with Octopussy, there's this lovely shot of you with Roger Moore when the Circus Brothers are throwing knives into the. How was that accomplished to get Roger's shirt to pin like that?
I think what I did was put the wire that the knife was travelling down through the shirt. That's a long time ago, we had a knife down a wire that we fired with a little catapult thing. And then for the follow-up, which is probably what that shot is, we took the wire away, put the knife back in so he could pull it out or rip his way out of it. So.
And did you have anything to do with the tiger that jumps out of Roger?
No, that was a stuffed tiger that John Glenn had found somewhere. What we did do while they were filming that was I'd gone up into the prop room where I knew they had a gorilla costume, and I borrowed the gorilla costume and put it on. And while I'd tipped off Jerry Gavigan the first, sort of in between takes, they set up to do one, and Roger was in the bushes acting, and I crawled up behind him in the gorilla suit and tapped him on the shoulder, and I think it ended up in the funny film that year. But yeah, it's just one of those silly jokes that Roger always used to love.
Oh yeah, yeah. You mentioned the taxi sequence earlier, and of course, very famously, a member of the public goes in between the two, and just thinking it's a normal kind of scene. So it gives you an idea, perhaps, of how chaotic Indian traffic and streets were at the time.
I didn't actually go back out there for the shooting. I went out and did all the recce and planning, set it all up and sent my crew out there, because then I stayed back here doing A, the model stuff, and B, Peterborough Railway, because, you know, there was so much going on both of those. I really needed to be in UK to do that.
And the Peterborough Railway has changed very little in 40 years.
Oh, it's just the same. You know, when we went back, when was that? 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
2023.
Yeah.
July, I think it was.
Yeah, I mean, it was just the same.
And I suppose there wasn't too much challenges in terms of shooting on the railway. They gave you pretty much full permission. And
well, no, I mean, because it's a private railway, it was you know, sort of over to us, and you know, we built the Mercedes car with the wheels on it that would fit on the track. We did the train supposedly hitting the car and firing the car with the air cannon across the front of the train, and landing in the lake, and getting Jerry Graydon jumping out of his rowing boat. Dickie Graydon, sorry.
Close, doesn't it? When
It was, yeah. But you know, I told him it was quite safe. The car landed in the water a long way before it got to them, but then once it hit the water, of course, it's travelling. But I mean, all it did was go up and nudge the boat. But their reaction was one of the things that you get when you do things in camera. It's more real.
Oh yeah, yeah. We won't go into View to Kill in much detail because, of course, you and I have done a commentary for the whole film. But some of our members watching may have gone to Amberley this May. So could you perhaps briefly talk about your time at Amberley?
Yeah, I mean, we did. We didn't have a lot to do actually inside the cave there, but we did do the blowing up of
Grace Jones at Mayday.
When she comes out on the trolley. Again, that was a big dynamite explosion. You know, we wanted something really big there. We did the airship stuff, and the airship coming in and Bond grabbing hold of the rope, picking up, forgotten the actress's name.
Tanya Roberts.
Yeah. Picking up Tanya into the airship. For me, it wasn't a major location. Most of the stuff we had to do for inside the mine, we did on the 007 stage at Pinewood, where we did the flooding. We had a quarter scale model with tip tanks and water, and we were able to raise and lower the water in there. I did a great model shot which never ended up in the water, or in the film rather, which was we had the model of the mine being flooded and the water coming in everywhere, and I wanted to put a bit of life into it somewhere. So we cut into one of the shelves up in the middle of the set where Christopher Walken and his henchman are going to be machine gunning the guys in the water. So we put a mirror cut into the shape of a crane arm that was up there. And then about 30 feet behind the camera, we put a rostrum up with a bit of stone facing on it and put Christopher Walken and the henchman standing on that with machine guns, which they had to hold left-handed because they were being reflected in a mirror. And so you can see the water flooding and both of them on the set actually machine gunning, but it was all a model. Why it never ended up in the film, I don't know, but I was always a bit sorry about that.
Oh, so that's a shame. We do have Peter Davis coming to the event in October. Perhaps we can ask him why he cut it. Is it true that when you blew up Mayday that John Glenn wanted it done a second time because he wanted it to be a big explosion? Do you recall that, or
no? I don't remember that. I thought we just
all in one sort of thing.
I thought we just did it once.
Yeah.
Was my memory, but
yeah. I just want to very briefly touch on your Oscar win for Aliens. What was it like working on that film, and of course receiving the award?
The film was a great experience. I mean, I first got the call to work on it, and Peter Lamont and I flew out to LA to meet Jim Cameron and Gail Ann Hurd, and discuss everything that Jim wanted. We went and met Ron Cobb and the other graphic artists out there. We spent a long time with Stan Winston talking about how he was going to do the Alien Queen, and came up with the idea that we would build two crane arms that could be counterbalanced and manually operated. One was to support his Queen, and the other one was to support the power loader with Sigourney in. And we built them so that you could either hang the power loader from above on two wires that were hidden in aerials on the shoulders of the power loader, or we could support it with a pole arm into the middle of the back so that there'd be nothing over the top. So we could pick and choose which one we were going to use for which shot. And that worked really well. I think we had less than 3 months to build the power loader, which was a big ask. I mean, it involved vacuum forming, fiberglass, metal, aluminium, hydraulics, pneumatics, servo motors, because there were so many things on it that worked or had to work. We built the acetylene torch into it, and hence the classic scene, "Come on, you bitch," with Sigourney. Sigourney loved it. She was great in it. Silly story that, again, it was one of those films that was a bit hard going at times, so we used to come up with a few practical jokes to lighten the mood. And we got Sigourney in the power loader and we got a stuntman built inside it, John Lees, who could help her control the arms because they were quite big and long and heavy. So although she was doing it, John was taking most of the weight. But all there was between them was a thin rubber padding strip that looked like the back seat of the power loader. So just for fun one day, we got a football bladder with a bit of hose attached and glued it on the back of the rubber seat that neither she nor John Lees knew was there, with the hose coming out the back. But it sat about there on John and about there on Sigourney's backside. And I told Jim Cameron about it, and he was up for it, thought it was very funny. So all the way through shooting, I'd nip out and blow up the football bladder, and you'd hear a little titter from the stuntman inside, and then you'd see Sigourney wobbling a bit and saying, "Are you all right in there, John?" And we kept it going for about, a whole take and set up, and never told either of them what we'd done afterwards. But the entire crew really were in stitches outside. But, everybody said Jim was hard work. He was hard work. He was a tough man to please, which is, good. I enjoy that. But he also wasn't averse to a practical joke or a bit of fun. And I got a lot of respect for him.
And it paid off, of course, with the Academy Award.
Yeah, I mean, the Academy Award was lovely. It involved a bit of the politics on the film with one of the American companies, because we were going, or they were going, over budget at the time, which their argument wasn't. It wasn't their fault. It was because Jim kept making changes. Well, that was Jim. But it all ended happily in the end.
Moving on to the Living Daylights, I wanted to mention the climax of the film, because I think originally there was a different ending. Do you recall that?
Do you know, I honestly can't remember. I must have read it at the time. It was never my favourite scene, that end scene. It was okay, but I thought we could have come up with something better. But the rest of the film was very enjoyable. Tim was great to work with. He was always a pleasure, and I think it's a great shame he left after only 2. But again, we had some great model stuff. We had the foreground miniature bridge that we filmed out in Ouarzazate in the Moroccan desert.
It's a wonderful shot, that, isn't it, with the Hercules going over and then blowing up.
It shows everything for real, and nobody, when they watched the film, I don't think ever realised that the river underneath was cling wrap on painted plyboard. And I think what helped it a lot was I've always been one for trying to sort of go outside the envelope a bit. And normally if you're doing a foreground miniature, if you do a pan at all, you've got to make sure you're doing a nodal pan, which means that you have to put the camera nodal point of the lens has to be on the center of the rotate, so that the perspective doesn't change at all, because it's going to that one point. So, because we were panning the things onto the bridge and the Hercules and everything, we had to make sure that we were really carefully set up on the nodal point of the lens. And I thought, well, if we're going to get away with that, why don't we try a tilt and a zoom as well? So, because you've got the camera moving and it's moving across everything, everybody's eyes are on the tanks or the horse riders or the Hercules coming in. By the time you've moved the camera and then you've zoomed in up to the plane or whatever it was, it sold the shot, and that's what you try and do. And all those shots that we did on that ended up in the movie, and they look real, and that's been my goal for my career, I think, is putting reality into effects and films. And sadly, I think it's a world that we've lost with CGI, because now everybody looks at a film, and especially now you've got AI coming in as well. Kids look at films and they know they're not real. And I think it's lost a lot of that escapism that you used to get, because those early Bonds, people would go and look at them, and all right, some of the stories were a bit far-fetched, but what was up there on the screen looked real.
I think that's something, even with the more modern Bonds, they've always tried to blend the visual effects with, as much as possible, practical. So even in the last film, you've got, maybe it's digitally composited, some of the explosions and shots, but you still got a mix of live action that perhaps you wouldn't have in some other.
I'd agree up until Die Another Day. Die Another Day for me was probably the most unbelievable Bond I was party to, and I think solely because of the visual effects, and what we were being asked to do was, it wasn't possible to make it look real. I remember the whole thing with the Ice Palace, that set, you look at that Ice Palace, there's no way on God's earth it could exist in reality, with those great ice pillars. And I got Lee Tamahori up on the set one day when I was shooting the model stuff for it, and said to him, look, if you want to make something look real, it has to be able to be real in real life. And I'm never going to be able to make this look real because it can't exist. But, it was too late. They'd already committed to the look.
I think they wanted it to be, because of the 40th anniversary, they wanted it to be a spectacle, and maybe the spectacle took over the
it was just, I felt wrong, but, the disappearing car and the surfboard across the lake.
Yes, best not to linger on that too much, is it really? But there is some nice model shots, as you say. There's the explosions in the demilitarized zone is very good. So again, that's practical stuff.
Yeah, and we did some good stuff on it, but the whole plane thing at the end again was so stretched. It.
But you're mixing the visual effects with the practical model of that. So you've got the same technique of the individual panels coming off and the fire, and you're just I think although some of it's a bit unbelievable, it's thanks to people like yourself that kind of just about keep you enough so you don't question it until after you're out the cinema. I think.
I think for me, we got much better material on Tomorrow Never Dies and Twine.
Yeah, because you built a 60-foot submarine model for
We
Twine,
built a
didn't you?
60-foot submarine and filmed it off of the Bahamas. For Twine. And what was great for me on both those movies was that Eon at that time knew me well enough and they trusted me. So I go off on my own to Mexico. I've made contact with Jim Cameron and John Landau and Peter Lamont, who were down in Mexico filming at Rosarito. Got permission to go down there and meet them and look at the set and the tank. And I flew out there, saw the tank, figured out how it would work, did a partial deal to use the tank and when we could take it over. I found the hotels for the crew, did a deal with the hotels, organised the shipping, organised a model company who I knew well up in LA to make the frigate. We built the stealth boat back at Frogmore, and we had to build it in pieces so we could get it into a container. We put inboard, outboard engines in it and in the frigate so that we could get a realistic wake behind both. But, I was trusted to set the whole thing up, do the deals, went up to Fox, did the deal with them to take over the tank. And then, went out and filmed it. Organised the American crew, organised the Mexican crew. Rosie came out with me. My wife, she was production secretary, continuity girl, and in charge of shipping. So she looked after all that. Terry Bamber was the production manager, bless him. And, I had the great crew, Paul Wilson, Frankie Elliott. And because we'd had day work and night work to do, I managed to do a schedule, which meant we'd start at sort of noon or early afternoon every day and shoot through until it was dark. So it gave us the opportunity to prep in daylight for the day shot and for the night shot. So when the darkness came, we were all ready to do whatever we had to do. So we shot the whole thing on schedule and a bunch of live action stuff with divers going in the water and halo jumpers landing in the water. I was quite pleased with the results of all that, and it was a lot of fun to do it. Stressful, but fun. And then the same thing happened on Twine. I'd worked with Michael Apted on the first film he ever directed, so knew him a little bit. And he was a lovely director to work with. Again, I fly off to the Bahamas. Had to stay at the Atlantic Palace Hotel, would you believe? And found a ship to use as a mothership that we could put the submarine on and lower it into the water every day and lift it out at night. The deck was big enough to hold the submarine. It was big enough to feed the crew and have somewhere for everybody to have lunch every day. Went and dived off the coast to find suitable locations to shoot everything. Because the submarine was 55 feet long and it had to be seen that way up, we needed 100 feet of water. So we were right on the edge of the Atlantic drop-off, where it went down 3,000 feet straight down. And we were diving to 100, 120 feet every day to get the various shots. But, you know, I found the hotel, did the deal with the hotels, chartered the ship, and I used to go back with a full report, give it to the office, and they'd do it. But I was always very honoured, I felt, to be trusted to do all that, as well as the effects. And I think the results from both movies were quite good because, again, it was all real and in camera.
There's some great effect shots in both those films. Again, doing it all for real. That, you know, at a time when you could have done them CG. Yeah. So it's nice that they sort of do that. And with the Devonshire and Tomorrow Never Dies and the MiGs and everything, it's all done for real.
Well, you know, there were all sorts of problems with getting shots in Baku, and having Bond's BMW driving through the oil fields. And again, we built a lovely little set on Pinewood Backlot. One of my guys built a model of the BMW, and I wanted it to be able to go through it much faster than it should have been able to go through. Because of the scale, we needed the dust coming out the back to look real, which meant we had to overcrank the cameras to slow the dust down. And we needed the car to drive fast to create the dust. So it meant it had to drive very fast so we could shoot. I think we probably ended up at 72 frames for most of those shots. But again, nobody ever realised that was a model.
So I wanted to mention License to Kill. So we've got quite a bit going on with this, but perhaps if we touch on the predominantly the stuff in Mexico with the tankers and some of the complexities that involved.
Yeah, I mean the whole shoot on License to Kill was hard because we were doing it all in Mexico. It meant everything had to come in either from England or be shipped down from LA. And getting things in and out of Mexico is not an easy task, or it wasn't then. When we started there'd been no decision on which tractor units we were going to use to tow the tankers. So we couldn't start building the tankers or any of the rigs until we knew what that vehicle was going to be. And there were one or two touchy moments, leading up to it getting those decisions. But once we got that, and we had, the lovely Rennie doing the driving, and he and his crew were always very collaborative and easy to get on with. But doing the filming up in the north of Mexico was hard, but again, we're working with good crew. Arthur Worcester was always lovely to work with. We wanted to obviously make all the explosions bigger and better than ever, especially as they're big petrol tankers supposed to be blowing up. We have rocket-fired missiles and tankers blowing up left, right and centre. And to his credit, Tim was quite up for doing the scene where he's running away from the tanker that blows up at the end, which was a big explosion, and it was quite warm. But, it's such a great shot seeing him zigzag away from it and it blowing up behind him. And, it, you can see it's not composited or anything. It's all in camera.
And you have that wonderful stunt that Paul Weston does with the death of Sanchez just prior to that as well. Tim sets fire to Paul dressed up as Sanchez. He's got a full burn suit on, but they wanted a full burn. And, obviously I talked to Paul about it at length before to make sure he was happy, because, there's so many things you've got to be careful of. If the fabric of the fire suit is too open, there's a danger that you can get the fumes from whatever you're using to create the fire. You get the fumes inside the costume and they could catch fire and burn. You've got to put enough on to make it look really as though he's alight from head to foot, but you've also got to make sure that it's not so much that you can't put it out quickly, because he's only got a limited amount of air to breathe with the setup inside. And you've got to make sure everybody around knows what's going on and is in 100% ready to jump in and you do this, you do that, you do that. So I think, safety is obviously a priority with those things. Paul and I always rib one another about who did what and your fault, my fault, nobody's fault, but it's all fun and in jest. But yeah, there's all those things, and there's also, of course, in that the model aircraft where the plane flies over the burning car that's gone off the edge of the cliff. And again, we shot that in the north of Mexico with a model radio-controlled aeroplane that we had to take off from a local road in between traffic. We had to get it into exactly the right position to fire the car. The car was that big, fired off a pole, an little air cannon. But getting the timing of the car and the plane and the camera turning at 5 times normal speed, it looks easy when you look at it played back because it's slowed down 5 times. But trying to get that timing in reality, you've got half a second to make a decision, if that. So yeah, we had fun with all that stuff. Was it still one go with that? Was it one board?
No, I think we did 2 or 3 just to get the timing right, and I'm not sure which one ended up in the film, but there was a choice. And, we also had to do the Sanchez's plane being pulled up under the helicopter, which, again, we wanted to do for real. We were using Coast Guard helicopters. And so I built we had a full-size aircraft without an engine in it, lightened it as much as possible. Then we put a fan winch inside that would allow a cable to play out at a controlled speed. We put an aerolite engine in the front driving a false propeller because the aerolites work up at any angle. Most engines would cut out when they got to there. And we hung it under the helicopter. And when we hit the radio control switch, it released the fan descender that was paying the cable out and allowed the plane to fly down. And then it was up to the helicopter pilot to sort of control it. But again, it worked really well. I'm trying to think what the other gags were that we did on that. I mean, we had I had a rubber shark made in LA and shipped down that we used in the water tank. We had the electric eel tank where we blew the glass out. There was and we had the where they throw the body out of the seaplane flying over the ship. And to do that, I sat in the open door of the seaplane with my feet on the skid on the blind side to camera with a kicking dummy. And the dummy had a wedge in the back. When you pulled the wedge out, it released the compressed air, so the arms and legs kicked. And then we flew over the top of the ship, and at the right moment I'd pull the plug and throw the dummy out. And again, that all worked. Worked for real, and it's just getting the timing right.
Yes, it is very effective, that sequence, and so is the shark attack scene on Felix, because I believe the stuntman had a missing limb.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
So when the shark he could just release the dummy bit of the leg.
Yeah, that was shot in just off Cancun, Mexico. I forget the diver's name, but they did some good stuff there for us.
And Mexico was quite a tricky location. I respect that. You mentioned firing the missile, but apparently that did hit somebody, didn't it?
It was set up to travel down a wire. I wasn't there on the day they did it, but the missile travelled down the wire all right. And I mean, bear in mind, we were in the back of beyond. I mean, there was no traffic, nothing around for miles. Somehow the missile got to the end of the wire and broke off it and carried on. And unbeknownst to us, a telephone engineer team had come in, I mean, quite a way, about half a mile or more away, and gone up a ladder on a telegraph pole, and this rocket hit the guy's arm. I mean, the chances of it. But it just shows you how, things can happen.
Yeah. I know it was an area of Mexico that had quite a reputation. There's been lots of fatal accidents over the years, which is why it was eventually closed off. And I suppose the coincidences of somebody being hit by a rocket by the catering truck going off the side of the cliff, and
there were all sorts of stories
things like that.
That particular road, I think a team of nuns or something had happened and people have been killed up there.
Yeah, I think a bus of nuns had gone off and they were all killed.
That was the story, but there were a lot of mysterious mishaps. We had a tanker set up to come careering down the hillside, and the camera boys had set a camera up out in the middle, which was going to be wild. They had to switch it on and run away. And the boys on the top we'd got the tanker rigged on an angle, ready to release. We got a release hook holding it. It was all sitting there quite happily, ready to go. And I shouted to the camera boys, keep your eye up above you because the safety's now been taken off the tanker, so it's only on a release hook. And just as I finished it, there was a twang, and the bloody thing came careering down the hill, and they legged it, fortunately. Nobody was hurt, but it was just one of those sort of edgy moments where you think, if I hadn't been shouting at them, watch that. And it literally was a split second between.
And also the famous still of the hand coming out the fire as well.
Was,
of course, just like it's like clouds looking at. It's just resembling something. But
it looks just like that coming out.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
But after all the other stuff, you can understand people might be a little bit spooked by it. But
I'm not that superstitious myself, but there you go.
Yeah. Speaking of fire, is it correct that you had an accident on the prep of Dine of the Day?
No, I had an accident on in between Aliens and Living Daylights.
Yeah.
And what happened was my father, while we were in the middle of Aliens, my father passed away. And he had a workshop in the garden that we used. Well, we used to build all the stuff for Day of the Jackal help. We built it all in that workshop. And I hadn't been in it for years. But of course he passed away and I had to clear everything out. So I'm going through it and I find a cardboard tub, must have been probably 25 kilos or 20 kilos of fine magnesium powder. Still got it's in a plastic bag inside. It had still got the seal on it from the suppliers, never been opened. And I rang up a friend of mine who was a scientist who ran a firework company and said, look, I found this magnesium powder. What's a safe way to get rid of it? He said, well, I'll take it on the back lot and bury it. And I said, I can't do that. And rigger comes along in 2 years, sticks a spade in the ground and whatever. So he said, well, burn it. He said, it's quite safe to burn. Put a pile of it out there and put a torch on it. So I thought, well, I'm not going to do that quite. So I got a little tiny bit, put it on a brick outside the back door, put a blowtorch on it, and it caught fire and it burnt just like a bit of magnesium strip did in the school science class. So I thought, well, that's all right. So we took it to Pinewood. And bear in mind, I'm in between pictures, so I got a few of the boys helping me clear up and get ready for the next one. And took it out on the back lot, down behind the paddock tank, nobody about. And I thought, well, I'm not putting a big pile down. I put a trail of it down on a board, and it was only a small trail. And I had a blowtorch on the end of a stick, so I was 4 or 5 feet from it. And I touched the blowtorch on the end of the strip, and the whole lot just exploded. It set me alight. It took the skin off both hands, which is why they're a bit funny. And I thought, I better get to first aid. So I started to run, and somebody said, wait, you're alight. So I rolled in a puddle on the ground. I thought, put my back out. It was only my jacket that was alight. And then carried on running. And we'd left the drum of magnesium a good 100 yards away from where we were doing it. And I'm running along, and somebody shouted again, you're still alight. So I stopped, and this guy came over with a stick and took my jacket off and threw it. And I stand there watching it, and it's arcing through the air. And I just shouted, run, to everybody, because, would you believe it, it went 20 yards and landed inside the top of the drum. Whereupon there was a very loud bang, which woke up everybody at Pinewood, certainly rattled the studio manager's windows. And I end up in first aid. Most of the skin's gone from my hands, not to be too graphic. So I've got my hands in some water. One of the boys that was with me's got a bit of a scorch on his forehead, but nothing dramatic. So we're sitting there waiting for the ambulance. The ambulance arrives. They're walking me out to the ambulance, and Nigel Wall's in his office opposite with Laura, his secretary, and he said, who is it? And Laura said, oh, it's nobody we know, it's a Pakistani. Well, that'll show you the colour of my face. And anyway, they're just about to put me in the ambulance. The nurse comes running out, and she said, oh, you can't take that plastic bowl. That's Pinewood's property. So I won't tell you what the reply was, but anyway, I ended up in hospital for 10 days. And then John Glenn, bless him, I came out of hospital, and I still got bandages. And I, for a bit of light relief, went down to visit them on the set where they were testing Sam Neill to be Bond. And John called Sam over to introduce him to his effects man. Never forgiven him for that. Yeah,
that's a very interesting story. The last thing I want to mention on the Bonds was just Charles and Diana's visit on The Living Daylights. Whether that was it was nice because they came. I think it was the Q Lab scene, and there was a lovely shot of Diana breaking a champagne bottle over Charles, and I think he set off the Ghetto Blaster rocket. I think on the
I mean that was all very swish at the time that royalty is visiting, and of course Charles and Diana were the couple of the day. So we knew we got this scene in the film, so I rigged the Ghetto Blaster to blow up and the missile to fire down a wire. And the plan was to get Charles to fire it, which involved pulling one switch to ignite and fire the missile. And then as soon as the missile hits the ghetto blaster, pull the second switch to blow it up. And so I explained to him, you know, what the timing was going to be, what he had to do. And he was great. He was really good, which led to that rather amusing picture of Lady Di and I. But
well, was that your idea to break the bottle over there? Was it John Glenn's or?
It came up during the morning, and I'd got a box of breakaway bottles in the workshop. So I bought them up, and they took them over, and I think there was a bit of discussion about it, and it culminated in Diana taking the bottle and whacking him over the head with it, which of course made every newspaper in town.
Oh yeah, they really went to town on that, didn't they? And just to sort of finish up, to come full circle, you started in the business because of your father, Cliff, and of course your son, Marcus.
Yeah, Marcus.
Because of yourself.
Marcus worked with me on a lot of the Bonds, and he never really wanted to do anything else. So he's worked with me for years. He's never ventured into supervisor territory, sadly. But we did a lot together on, pretty much all the Bonds we've been talking about, or the latter ones. And he still works for me today down at Leavesden, looking after the Warner Brothers tour.
And that's a lovely sort of swan song to your career of having the Harry Potter films and of course all the experiences and sort of spin-offs that they've had.
It's nice that the Richardson family are now, what are we? We're about 104 years of effects in movies. So it's covered a fairly wide range of stuff. From one of my father's first films was working on a story about Kitchener's ship being sunk, and they had a foreground cutout of the waves, they had a background cutout of the sea and the sky, they had a model ship on two sticks that they moved along between the two, and my father's job was to lie on the floor with a rubber bulb full of talcum powder, and at the moment the torpedo was supposed to hit the ship, he did that on the bulb, the plume of talcum powder went up and the ship went down.
So it's come a long way between now and the latest Harry Potter films. And are you excited for how the industry is going to go forward? Of course, there's lots of challenges with visual effects coming in, but what do you think the future holds for the film business?
I'm despondent, if I'm honest. My own feeling about what's wrong today is, and bear in mind this is truly a personal take on it, but when I grew up, in what I regard as the golden age of movies in the 60s and 70s, all the directors and the people I worked with had grown up through the business. They learnt their trade. Some of them were writers, some of them were first assistants, some of them were cameramen, but they'd long worked in the industry on a film set. They understood how a movie goes together. And a film isn't, I don't think, a good film if it centres on one trade, one personality, one person. You get prima donna cameramen, prima donna art directors, and I'm sure you get prima donna effects men, but a good film is when everybody's work dovetails and nobody's shining above anybody else. It's a good film. And all these people had that training because they started at the bottom and worked up. Now we're sort of infiltrated by people who have gone to film school or university or whatever and studied what everybody else has done. And then they either want to copy it or try and improve on it. And of the films I've done that were original at the time, like The Omen, the first Omen, or The Straw Dogs, I've seen so many of them that have been remade, and they're not even worth the light of day. And I think it needs to go back to basics in a way. and it's to a large degree it's like CGI. People are doing things that is impossible to happen in real life.
Yes.
You look at the flying on the Battle of Britain, it was all real. You don't see a plane fly towards camera and then the propeller goes through the camera. It can't happen. As soon as you do that, you lose the audience's credibility of what's on the screen. You lose the reality of it. And a lot of these people doing CGI all think they're being terribly clever, but they've got to think, what would I be doing? How would I do this if I was doing it for real? And I had a big argument with the director on a film called North Sea Hijack. Lovely man. And we'd filmed the first shot of the oil rig on Pimer Backlot, and I'd put the camera on a floating rig because we got waves. So the camera was moving slightly, which it would be. And he saw the first day's rushes, and he came to me and he said, the shot looked absolutely terrific. He said, but the camera was moving. He said, it should be an audience point of view. And I said, well, all right, where are we filming? He said, well, out in the North Sea. I said, well, if you were in the North Sea, what would you be standing on, a rostrum off at the bottom, or would you be on a boat? Well, he said, we'd have to be on a boat. So I said, well, if you're on a boat, surely it'd be moving. And it took me half an hour to convince him. But that's putting reality in film.
Yeah. I think there's a hankering, I think, for audiences, from an audience point of view, to get back to practical filmmaking. And some of the films that have, Oppenheimer being an example, people are perhaps a bit tired of the CGI-led film. So maybe there is going to be a resurgence in the business for that sort of old school sort of filmmaking.
I mean, Oppenheimer didn't really do it for me, but I think there are directors that are trying to do more for real. The same as, some are trying to go back to using real film.
Yes, well, IMAX is a big thing now, isn't it? So you would think that wouldn't be the case in the 21st century, but actually people are really hungry for the big vinyl records. Yes, so maybe we're going in that direction. I know people that probably have watched this, probably Googled it before I asked you this, but you mentioned the silent stage. Mm-hmm. Of course, most people have heard of the sound stage. What's the difference?
The silent stage at Shepperton was a big stage. It was originally built in a studio. I think it could have been Morton Hall. I'm not 100% sure. And they closed the studio, so they took the silent stage apart, lock, stock and barrel, took it to Shepperton and built it on the back lot. And it was always known as the silent stage because it was a huge stage. It wasn't soundproofed inside, but it also had built into it a water tank. So inside the walls of the stage, there was a 6-foot-high concrete wall all the way round with doors that you could put in. And so many films we filmed there back in the day. And because it was probably the biggest stage in the country, it was used for a vast number of huge sets that were built. We shot a lot of The Omen on there. We shot the water sequences for Lord Jim and A Bridge Too Far on there. They built a lot of the architectural palaces that were in the historical films of the 60s on there. And although there was the occasional problem of a plane flying over the top, most of the time, they could get away with the sound in there. But it was the first really big stage until the 007 came along.
It might be just nice to finish the interview with just mentioning Robert Redford, who recently died. You worked with him on A Bridge Too Far and The Great Gatsby. Do you have a memory of Robert Redford to finish off?
Oh, he was such a nice man. A lot of Redford was, Newman was. But I remember on Gatsby, I had to do bullet hits on him, which is always a bit tricky if the actor's in the water, because although you've got a bit of a pad and a backing plate and a blood bag and a squib, if they're underwater at the time, the pressure of the water on it is going to kick back as well as kick out. So I didn't want to put bruises all over Robert Redford. So I had to be very careful with that. At the same time, he had to be lying on a lilo, which had to have bullets go into it and splashes come up and it deflate and sink all in a one shot. And he's got a one-piece sort of wool swimsuit on of the day. So I've rigged that with squibs. I've got him all wired up, ready. I've got the lilo all wired up. I got little charges hidden in little plates on the underside of the lilo to blow the holes to let the air out. And because they're all setting up the scene, this was a swimming pool that was specially built on Pinewood back lot. Robert and I are sitting on the edge of the pool. I'm in swimming trunks because I'm in the water wiring things up. And he's all rigged. So he's sitting on next to me and we're sitting on the side of the pool chatting. And he said to me, he said, I don't like doing this. He said, I've always preferred to be on your side of the camera. And I looked at him and smiled and thought, yeah. And I can't tell you what else we talked about. We were just sitting there chewing the fat. But he was such a friendly, nice man with no side whatsoever. And then, of course, next time I meet him, it's on Bridge Too Far. I'd got my jaw wired shut because it was shortly after my car accident. And so, of course, he had to ask me about that. And then I had to tell him, well, we're going to put you in this little canvas boat. It's all right because it's got a little motor in it. And drive you across the river. And and there's going to be explosions going off all around you. And I'd got dynamite explosions rigged. You can't put them in the water there because it's a fast-flowing river. So what I did was put one of my crew into as many boats as we could, and they got a dynamite charge hanging from a cork float, tied on a bit of black line onto the back of the boat at a set distance. So they'd all set off, they get out into the river. The idea was you throw the cork float and the dynamite into the water, it trails out behind you at a safe distance. My guy sitting in the boat then is watching the float to make sure no other boats come anywhere near it and that it's always a safe distance. He can then connect the battery and wait with the push button for me to say fire number whatever. So we've managed to get several of these boats right in front of Redford's boat with the charge in between. So, of course, Robert's going along, paddling, Hail Mary full of grace and all that. And we fired some of the explosions. And, of course, you send a column of water up in the air, has to come back down again. So he's in there like a drowned rat. There's Peter MacDonald in the back of his boat with a handheld camera saying, "Gee, Robert, this looks great." And not a word of complaint. He just got on and did it. So, nice man.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I think that's probably a good place to end it. Thank you very much, John, for speaking to me today.
Pleasure.